You know, I haven't talked to him recently. I keep meaning to call him. Jack usually talks to him. Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. So we're just waiting for Jack. Okay.
Call the meeting to order. Welcome to the scheduled meeting of the Historic Resources Commission of the City of Albany. My name is John Myers, Chair of the Commission. Commissioners in attendance this evening, Commissioner Kaplan, Commissioner Tobin, Commissioner Barry, Commissioner Patrick, and Commissioner Kent. And welcome to the hybrid version of the HRC meeting in person, 200 Johnson Boulevard, and the 2 members of the audience here, and inviting people to participate on Zoom. We have a quorum. We're still waiting for the arrival of one more commitment. We can proceed. This is Glenn from the planning office representing the commission, and Mark from the Corporation Council representing the legal department. This is a public hearing and a workshop, so we have a hybrid meeting ourselves. The first item on the agenda is the public hearing item, and that is the Consolidated Car Heating Company Complex consideration for nomination to the state and national register of historic places.
John, can I just ask you to pull your mic in a little bit closer? They're having a hard time hearing us on Zoom.
Okay. Joining us is Mr. McAnally.
And I'll get you a mic.
A full vote. Again, to repeat, the first item on the agenda is the public hearing portion, and this is the consideration of the proposed designation or nomination for the state and national register of historic places, 413 North Pearl Street, and combined with 928 and 940 Broadway, and the former Consolidated Car Heating Company complex.
And we have Carrie Trainer here from KTA Preservation Specialist presenting the nomination this evening. So Carrie, I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you see the full screen?
I can. Okay. And you know what? I'm going to turn my video off. I find that sometimes doing this, I start sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher and getting digitized. So yeah, I'm going to turn my video off. It seems to make it just a little bit better. And after the end of my presentation, I'll turn it back on to address any questions or comments.
Okay. And just let me know when you want to go on to the next slide.
I'll just say next slide. And there are a lot of slides, but it's going to go quick. So okay. I'll get started now.
All right.
Okay. So the Consolidated Car Heating Company complex, located at 413 North Pearl Street and 928 to 940 Broadway, consists of one interconnected four-story building with three major components constructed in several stages between 1893 and 1914, in what was historically an industrial area situated between the Hudson River to the east and the New York Central Railway to the north and west. The central business district of Albany was located to the south, and the terminus of the Erie Canal was located nearby. The company, which functioned primarily as the primary office headquarters and manufacturing space of the company, was the largest manufacturer of railway heating equipment in the nation. It meets National Register Criterion A in the area of transportation and Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good example of an industrial building demonstrating the growth of a transportation-related manufacturing business over the time from the late 19th into the early 20th centuries. The period of significance is 1893 with the first construction through 1958, as the demand by 1958 for railway equipment waned, and the company, then known as Consolidated Metal Products, became CMP Industries and exited the transportation business entirely. CMP Industries manufactured, quite different from the railroad heating equipment, dental equipment. The tower, visible on this 1914 etching, was removed in 1936 within the period of significance. The company was one of the major producers of transportation-related heating equipment used in railway cars, subway cars, and ships. It contributed to the history of transportation and the technology associated with the conveyance of passengers and materials in the late 19th and early 20th century. The construction technology of the building, mill construction with brick load-bearing walls in the 1893 and 1906 portions of the building, gave way to the reinforced daylight factory of the 1913-1914 portion of the building. The company moved to the Albany area from West Virginia in 1889. The original stockholders, which is interesting to note, included James Roosevelt, father of Franklin D. Roosevelt, James Fenimore Cooper, grandson of James Fenimore Cooper, author of Last of the Mohicans. George Westinghouse, the famous inventor, sold his Standard Car Heating Ventilation Company out of Pittsburgh to the CCHC for $400,000 in stock. He also joined the board of directors and remained director until 1910. In 1902, some of Mr. Roosevelt's stock was transferred to Franklin D. Roosevelt. With this impressive roster of stockholders, the company was positioned to become one of the largest and most prominent businesses in the transportation-related industry. The company continued to grow, as noted by additions in the early part of the 20th century, expanding its facility. During the war years, First World War, it manufactured manufactured bullets for Russian allies, and then switched over to manufacturing ammunitions for the US government. They made 300,000 shell cases at a cost of $3.85. Similarly, post-World War, in World War II, they continued in the manufacture of war-related products. After each war, they returned back to the manufacture of heating equipment and equipment for the transportation industry. What this image shows that I'm going to show with the sandbar maps coming up, the building in the far northwest corner is the 1893 portion. The portion in the middle is the 1906 portion, and the portion at the southeast corner is the Daylight Factory. And so we can go on to the next slide. The building's history and historic context are documented by the Sanborn maps. The building presents a clear material, structural, and spatial divide, distinguishing each period of construction. The 1893 and 1906 Sanborn maps, or the 1893 and 1906 portions of the building as illustrated on this 1908 Sanborn, feature brick-bearing walls with mill construction. The 1906 portion is set back to the south and east, while the 1893 portion is closer to North Pearl Street. Both portions historically featured 6/6 and 2/2 double-hung wood sash windows. Some do remain extant. However, most have been replaced with 1/1 vinyl sash. The windows featured arch heads and brick sills, typical of the factory construction and construction at this time. Next slide, please. As we can see from this image, the 1913-1914 reinforced concrete portion, the Daylight Factory typology to the east, it features industrial sash windows, concrete columns, beams, and floor deck. The portion in the light green up adjacent to the 1893 portion of the building was constructed in 1919. Next slide. As documented on the 1951 Sanborn, all the major portions of the nominated building had been constructed by this time. Note, the water tower is no longer extant, having been removed in 1936. As you'll see in some of the images I have, a single-story concrete addition was added to the south of the 1913 portion in 1965. This is a non-historic component of the resource. Next slide, please. Thank you. With that very brief history of the company, I just want to quickly show you some images to illustrate the parts. Here we see the 1893 portion of the building closer to North Pearl Street with the main entrance, which led to offices for the company on the second floor. The 1906 expansion is set back. While the design aesthetic and materials are consistent, the two components are distinct spatially. Next slide, please. In this image, we see the 1919 frame shed visible to the north, as well as the earliest 1893 portion of the building with its entrance. Note, the door is non-historic, although the masonry opening with transom remains visible and extant. Next slide, please. Here we see the west elevation of the 1906 portion of the building. I'm going to reference this slide or this image towards the end of the presentation. Next slide. Here we have the north elevation of the 1893 portion of the building with the 1919 frame shed. Again, note that the windows have been replaced with non-historic vinyl sash. However, existing sash do remain extant, so we do know what these windows look like historically. Next slide, please. Here we see the northwest corner showing all of the components, including the boiler room, with original 6/6 double-hung wood sash windows visible on the first floor. Next slide, please. Here we begin to see the aesthetic difference as well as the structural difference between a Daylight Factory with its concrete construction and broad expanses of glass windows within the bay. This clearly illustrates the architectural evolution structurally in factory design typology, moving from brick, mill construction to reinforced construction, with these windows allowing for daylight and ventilation, hence the name Daylight Factory. Next image, please. Here we see the east elevation of the 1913-14 portion of the building with the non-historic 1965 addition to the south. Next slide. And here we see a view of that addition. Next slide. The factory floors of the 1893 and 1906 portions of the building consist of 2 rows of wood columns running east-west, supporting wood beams and framing. The construction of this factory and structural type allowed for an open floor plan necessary for the industrial manufacturing function of the building. Next slide. And here we see just a close-up view of that typical mill construction typology. Next slide. The spatial relationship between the older mill construction and the reinforced concrete daylight factory is visible in as the 1906 portion flows into the 1913-1914 plan. Note wood columns, beams, framing, wood flooring, in the distance, the concrete columns and floor. Next slide. Historic photos outside the company complex in 1939 show the 2/2 wood sash windows. This view is towards that south elevation I pointed out a few moments ago of the 1906 portion of the building. A brass foundry is visible to the west. The image to the left shows you an extant 2/2 wood sash window. Next slide, please. Again, the 1914 portion of the building, we see the spatial relationship that exists internally. So although on the exterior, we do read these portions of the building as separate, on the interior, the materials allow for an understanding of the construction time and the structural typology. However, the portions of the building are interconnected, allowing it to read as one functioning unit. Next slide, please. Daylight factories are distinguished by large expanses of windows set within the reinforced concrete structural grid, providing light and ventilation. Next slide, please. This historic photo from 1930 illustrates the inside of the 1913-14 portion of the building. Note, the open plan accommodates the manufacturing equipment of this large nationally recognized company and the wide expanses of windows providing light and ventilation. Next slide, please. The complex was also the headquarters of the company. The offices located on the second floor of the 1893 portion of the building feature hardwood floors, beadboard detailing at the walls, decorative casing at the windows and doors, crown molding at the ceiling. Detailing that what one would expect given the relative importance of the founding stakeholders, as well as the significance of the manufacturing company, as one would expect. Next slide, please. And here we see an etching from 1923. Note the 1913-14 portion in the foreground with the 1906 and 1893 portions extending towards the background. The Consolidated Car Heating Company complex retains a high level of integrity and meets criterion A in the area of transportation and C in the area of architecture. The period of significance begins with the construction of the 1893 portion of the building and ends in 1958, when the company exited the transportation industry entirely. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now open this up for comment from the commission and take any public comment as well at this time. The commission will make, this evening will make a recommendation either in support of the nomination or in opposition to the nomination, and that recommendation will then be forwarded on to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they will be holding their State Historic Review Board meeting on September 9th before forwarding this on to the Park Service for National Register consideration. So,
I have a question.
yes.
So I wonder, you described the 1965, I don't know where to look.
Hold on. Yeah, give me one. Let me stop. Let me stop the share. Hold on.
I'm like, I don't know what got me there.
There we go.
All right, there we go. So you described the 1965 portion of the building as non-historic, but it's 56 years old. I guess I'm kind of curious why you described it non-historic. Has it been dramatically altered? Have you talked to SHPO about that? Because, you know, in my experience, they would want to look at all the features, including anything that's older than 50 years old. And sitting here doing the math, it's 56 years old. So just taking that into consideration, I'm very supportive of the nomination board, but I just wanted some more background on that. What led you to that determination?
We did consult with okay, so we did consult with SHPO in defining our end date for the period of significance. And given the significance of the building as factory construction, in terms of its architecture, going from that mill construction, which was the earlier portions associated with this company, through the daylight factory, which was part of that manufacturing component of the building, and its relationship to the transportation industry. So there's our criterion C, which has to do with factory, and criterion A, which has to do with the transportation. The company completely left the transportation industry as the rail industry went into decline. And that 1965 building, the dental company, the manufacturing company, has a completely different manufacturing process. It's not the line, it's not this same type of manufacturing process. And so their spatial requirements are different. So what that became was their warehousing, which really it's very difficult to argue why that's significant, given the argument that we built in terms of transportation and this company and factory construction typology. So we talked to SHPO about that, and we discussed, part of it is how do you make the argument for the 1965 portion? It can't just be about age. There has to be, well, it's old, it meets the 50-year cutoff, but it's very difficult to make a significance argument based on the building's history.
So what is it? So it is the type of manufacturing changed from transportation, and I hear your argument and understand the criteria there, but when the nomination company, but when it stopped being a transportation company, whatever it became, how many years did it? You know, I noticed the sign on the building. How many years did it remain a manufacturing building? You know, the purpose for which that 1965 building was built. So how many years did it serve that purpose? And where I'm going with this is, as we want to consider it, not just as we want to consider the evolution of buildings and attempt to create more expansive history. And, you know, would there be an opportunity to continue to consider that 1965 building as part of the next phase of this company that, you know, was it there for 40 years? Was it there today? So I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah.
And what did SHPO say about that? Because, yeah.
It's a different, and again, as we work through this discussion with SHPO, the building just didn't. I understand where you're going. The dental equipment that they made was itty bitty. You sat at a place and you manufactured. I mean, they manufactured denture type things. They manufactured things that really, it could have happened anywhere. I guess that's part of it. There was nothing site specific except that they moved into this building. So there's really nothing site specific about the historic components and that historic, the relationship to the typology that dental company could have gone anywhere. And again, this nomination, went through the Part 1 process as it was part of a historic rehabilitation tax credit process. So we fleshed this out and discussed this for a long time to really decide.
Follow-up quick question. I'm sorry. Is that 1965 non-historic portion scheduled to be demolished as part of this rehabilitation tax credit project and a new building built there?
You know what? I am not part of that. And I do not have an answer to that question because I'm not involved with it anymore. We wrote the NR. I don't even know who the architect of record is. So I can't even tell you what it's going to be.
Thank you.
I know, Aaron, kind of, Redburn Development, I put the article in the packets. Redburn Development has purchased the building. They are planning 80 residential units within the structure and then 12,000 square feet of commercial space, I think on the first floor. And they are using historic tax credits for the project.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I didn't have a chance. I saw your Dropbox.
That's, yeah.
Today, so.
That's fine.
Okay.
And, sometimes it's difficult. It's tough for developers because, I've worked on projects where they've wanted something to be historic and, the narrative didn't support it. The history didn't support it. So, yeah.
Well, clearly, it appears that the history and certainly the period of significance that you identified from 1893 or 1897 through 1958, when they exited the rail business or the transportation business, that seems to dovetail quite well with the criteria that you've established, the A and C period of significance. So, and I read through the nomination form and found it to be quite interesting and well crafted. And, made a good argument for the nomination of this facility. And I think we would look forward to seeing it move forward with nomination of the recommendation of the commission. Right now, I'm just speaking for myself, not my fellow commissioners.
So, Erin, was the Part 1 approved?
I could look into it. I believe it was.
I could, I can answer that. Yeah, it's got an approved Part 1.
An approved Part 1, which is not necessarily identical to NR, whether that piece of the building will be included in the actual nomination. Those are two separate paths.
Now, typically, the approved Part 1 basically says that NPS is just determined based on the information that they have that the building is potentially eligible for listing on the National Register. I have not seen an approved Part 1 unless the Part 2 is just horrible, building not get listed after having an approved Part 1.
I've had contributing buildings not be approved for Part 1, so I've seen some conflicts there. Is that going to be a parking lot?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Erin, do you know?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything for it.
Is anyone here to answer that question?
Mm-mm. But I can follow up and I can find out.
Yeah. Mike, I just say, I support this nomination. I think it's great. You might get questions on the 1965, and I thank you for answering them. I could see that being raised.
Erin, would you pull back those photos?
Yep. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Sorry, give me 1 second, Marilyn.
I'm actually looking at the photos, if I may, just as I'm thinking through this 1965 bit, especially when they presented this report, because when I heard non-historic in 1965, my first thought was, well, it is historic. So maybe as part of the presentation, explaining why it doesn't fall within the period of significance. And my first thought when somebody says something's not historic is to figure out if that's true. Yeah.
One, the architecture is incompatible with the major complex.
Well, you could say the daylight factory architecture is incompatible with a 19th century bed. I'm just saying, lots of brownstone buildings were demolished and arts and crafts buildings were demolished because they were not historic. So,
the other thing, the compatibility is not just about appearance. There's a compatibility of functional use and associated use, which is the factory, the manufacturing type of like a line, that you're on a line and you do this and it moves on and you do this. And the 1965 portion of the building, and again, we tried to find an argument for it. It's a warehouse. It's where they stored stuff to be shipped out. There's no manufacturing in it at all. And that became the really hard thing to argue for us. Just saying it's an old building makes it really difficult when you're trying to argue about architecture in terms of structure and typology and function and use. So the daylight factory is closely related to actually the typology history of factory and open plan.
I think it's a sound argument you make. I don't necessarily concur and certainly don't know what the review board will do. I'd like to move the project forward and wonder if there's an opportunity to express our, if not concern, but our interest in the review board considering the 1960s portion. That we raised our own conversation about that. I don't know what the word would be, but not like that. One spoken.
right, and yeah, I guess for the record, and I'm understanding that would take away from that transportation related criteria perhaps, or rather I see it as an addition to that, because you're not losing the transportation related bit, but again, you're telling more of the story that the building continued to have a life after this company left. And that's the piece that I'm kind of getting at. I mean, the daylight factory and the earlier buildings, it could have been any manufacturing that happened there. It happened to be this interesting transportation company, but it's not like that was, it's not like a rope building, or it's not something that's specifically built for that type, but it could be a shirt collar factory, and so that's kind of where I'm going a bit with that. It could tell more of the story of this complex about how it became this little dental company and the buildings where it was readapted and they put in this warehouse. And again, fully support the nomination. Just kind of raising it as a point of question and in the interest of getting to a point in our field where we're just making sure we're telling more complete stories about places.
Well, certainly it was 1965, it was built for a purpose.
Right, exactly.
That story should be shared. Well, it was the continuum of this being a manufacturing facility. It exited the railroad association, or the association with transportation. It evolved into another purpose, and that's what we see in a lot of historic buildings, is that continuum of use and the evolution of them. And that played a role in its evolution because it then served another purpose that had not been defined previously with the use of the building as it related to the transportation.
And I would add that not only does that discussion belong to this complex, but it's the entire quarter. Within, this is just an individual nomination, but the quarter has probably a lot of layer
There
structure.
are a lot of stories just like this one. It was an industrial corridor. And there's a lot of, high-powered industry that, function along that corridor. So, I mean, it's great to hear the story told for this one, and particularly the importance of the company and its stature in the industry that it attained for a company in Albany, New York, being the largest producer of these devices in the world. It's a pretty interesting story.
I'm in full support of the nomination. You did a very good job in presenting the information as you did.
Oh, yeah, it tells a great story. We have to make a motion, I would assume.
Let me just,
Because this needs to go back to the state with our recommendation or concurrence, or concurrence with condition or with an observation. So,
I'll make a motion that.
well, we have, I'm sorry, we have Kara Macri from Historic Albany is signed up to speak. Kara, you should be unmuted.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I just wanted to go on the record for Historic Albany, very much supporting the listing of this entire complex. We're always thrilled to see new buildings, especially groups of buildings, and in this case, warehouse buildings and industrial buildings, which we don't have a lot of in Albany that are listed. So we're really thrilled to see the time and effort that was put into this project. I have to say, we really appreciate the discussion that everyone has put into looking at the 1960s building, because we totally understand how difficult it is to make that case for mid-century buildings. And I totally get where Aaron's coming from, because we hear a lot of people just kind of dismiss that period of architecture as, totally not worth it. But there's a challenge to kind of making all of it work together. And it is a part of our history that we do need to tell. But I think it's a perfect segue to more of a discussion about listing the warehouse district, because it totally fits in with the significance of that. So but that's a bigger conversation for the rest of us and not something Redburn needs to tackle. So, but we very much appreciate the project and we're thrilled to see this. So we're very, very supportive of this nomination.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay.
So,
All right. So then we'll need a motion and a vote. A motion second and then a vote for.
entertain a motion.
I move that we support the nomination, for the state national register, and we voice our concern. I may come back to the concern. Voice our concern that all of the elements that fall within the 50-year period are not included in the period.
What about, I lost it, interest in including the parts of the building that are in the discussion of I'm trying to get something about the discussion of the through history of manufacturing at that site. Something along those lines.
We express it as a concern or an observation that,
Observation.
it is value it as a contributing factor. view it as a contributing factor to this complex. Because it represents the continuum of use of this facility for the purpose of manufacturing.
And that, I think you just hit it on the head, because if this were a historic district, that 1965 portion would be contributing in the historic district. This wouldn't even probably be a discussion. So what is that? I don't know. I'm just thinking out, what does that mean about an individual designation? Yeah. Anyways, that's not really for this motion. I'm just.
I will, oh, sorry, Jack.
One
Yep.
more observation on it. I don't know what you need a second on something before we discuss it, how this is done. I'd like to know if the land that the 1960s building is on the same land and is therefore an integral part of a complex throughout history, or is it an adjoining piece of property that at a later date, after it left the period of significance, 1958, somebody said, let's buy that building over there, we could use it to support our efforts. So it makes a difference. We use the term complex. Is it a complex, or is it two things that came together at some point in the 1950s? And I think to know that, you have to know who was the owner going back probably as early as the early 20th century, or even in 1893. Was this always meant to be part of a complex, or is it a neighboring piece of property that somebody decided to purchase?
It was a neighboring piece of property. The Sanborn maps document that. The 1951 Sanborn,
Hold on.
it shows it.
It had an independent.
It was something else, and they purchased the land to expand on, which that happens all the
They did
time.
for the Daylight Factory too, although the Daylight Factory fell under the grid.
Yep, that happens all the time, where you just purchase the lot beside you because you want to expand. The Daylight Factory was constructed. There was a brass foundry. There was a dwelling. I'm looking at the Sanborn. Yeah, there were a couple of dwellings where the Daylight Factory was constructed.
I think it's interesting to know that fact, but I don't know that lessons, when it was on the side of saying everything up through 1960s, it's a 50-year gauge, whether the property boundaries changed or not, is interesting to know, but I don't think it changes the concept that this manufacturing complex adjusted and modified its physical features, including the site. So, but it is interesting to the question. Yeah.
I think it's less significant. If we had found that this was always part of it, used for various functions, and eventually as the 1965 building, that would be a strong argument for the complex. It has an independence in its own right that was added for a much different time and period and use. And I can see it in the neighborhood, in the entire district, but I wouldn't like to include it in the period of significance that really very well documented. It's a very specific thing that warrants an independent identification on it.
Well, let me try my motion again. I'm not changing where I was, but the words are.
I'm not certain how it gets excluded from the story in any way, whether a house is significant, less significant, more significant. It's part of the lineage.
Yes. So my motion would be that we support the nomination as presented to us, and we express interest that all elements constructed within the 50-year period be considered in determining the period.
Second.
Any other people signed up to say anything? Anyone from the audience care to comment on this? Okay. We have a motion, a second, I'll call it to a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried.
All right.
So thank you very much for
Thank you.
a great
Thank you.
presentation.
You know, I wouldn't mind seeing the 1965 portion included either. You know, I just, you know, but just as an aside, kind of off the record, historic districts are the way to do it, because you do get that much larger, and you're not trying to make an argument for a single entity. You make it for a much broader, you know, and you try to make it as much of a net as you can, that you can justify. So that's something to think about moving forward. Get your districts.
Yep. We put the flag in the dirt there, so we can you know, move forward with the district nomination.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Carrie.
Bye now.
Bye. All right.
Okay, the next portion of our meeting is migrated to a public workshop. Next item on the agenda is 152 West Avenue.
Give me 1 second. Let me.
In the Overland Triangle.
What did I do here? Okay. Actually, can we take 1 second? I need you all to really pull your mics in and use your mics, because people are having a hard time hearing. And
Now, can you just turn yours off real quick? It's working.
all right. So 152 Western Avenue. This came in as the planning department was notified back in June that this previously unpainted hard face building, the property owners had begun painting the upper portions of the brick building without a permit for the exterior work or a certificate of appropriateness for the painting of the brick. The contractor was advised to stop all work and reach out to the planning department to discuss next steps and what was needed to move the project forward. I spoke with the contractor at the end of June and advised them that the paint should be removed from the building, or if they wish to put in an application to paint the structure, they could. It would have to come before the Historic Resources Commission for review, and most likely the application would be denied based on prior applications that had come before the Historic Resources Commission for similar applications. In August, I was made aware that the building had been fully painted, and at the time I had received an application, but it had yet to be processed through to be placed on an agenda. So on August 12th, the building department I notified the building department on August 12th that the work had been done without any approval, and on August 13th, they went out to the site and issued a stop work order. And the application was placed on the agenda to come before the Historic Resources Commission. So the commission, tonight is just a workshop, so there's no action to be taken tonight. But this is in violation of the rehabilitation guidelines, the paint section of the rehabilitation guidelines of the USDO. which states that the painting of hard-faced brick or unpainted masonry is strictly prohibited. I think as preservation professionals, we do know the issues that are caused with painting hard-faced brick, and just general maintenance issues that it can cause. So this is a discussion tonight. I think, you know, whether you all have a clear path forward or any comments or suggestions, I do believe that the property owner and the applicant and the contractor are here tonight. If you do have any comments, but I think that the historic resource overlay guidelines, the rehabilitation guidelines, are very clear in how we deal with applications for hard-faced and unpainted masonry.
So procedurally, if this were denied for the reasons that you outlined.
Is your light on?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's just me.
What happens then?
So when we dealt with earlier this year, well, they cannot apply for hardship modification because this is a self-created hardship. So the hardship modification that is in the USDO, the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance or zoning ordinance, strictly states that if it is a self-created hardship, you cannot apply for the hardship modification. You have no grounds. So the pathway forward for this application is either it is denied and they reverse the unapproved work, or the commission has the ability to push the application forward and approve it.
So if we do not approve it, what are the next steps for and there's a stop order?
There's a stop work order.
So how will the owner move forward if they have a denial?
They would have to remove the paint from the brick and revise their application to just paint the wood exterior features of the building, but carefully, remove the paint from the brick to re-expose the original yellow brick as it previously was.
And if the owner did not want to do that, then what would happen?
Then there would be further fines put in place. I believe the city is allowed to fine up to $1,000 per day and there's court prosecution that can take place until they address the violation and reverse the work.
Has the owner been fined so far?
I believe that there is a fine that goes with the stop work order, but I think there hasn't been any further violation fines put in place because they were coming to the Historic Resource Commission.
This is a workshop. Can we hear from the owner?
Yeah, you can come right up. I think you just need to turn the microphone on.
Okay.
But if you could give us your name.
Absolutely.
Yep.
First of all, thank you all so much for the time joining. My name is Ken Hansen. I'm actually
Okay.
the contractor. I think I told you. The first thing I want to say is, one, I apologize if this is not any of our. We didn't intentionally try to violate anything there. I've done a lot of work in the city of Albany. I also work as a painter. I'm a general contractor. I also own a third generation flooring company. And we always try to do everything and be compliant. I think some of it was kind of the uniqueness of the times and also a misunderstanding, because the owners of the building had applied for a building permit and way back in the fall, with the paint being part of the scope of work. And they have multiple properties in the city of Albany, and they had seen being disturbed multiple times. And they thought it was approved. And in fact, they did get a building permit. but I guess the exterior was not, they thought it was included, and I guess maybe that it was not. I was actually contacted back in, I think it was April, to start looking at the project and to do what needed to be done. And I spoke with Mike Chop. I read multiple email exchanges where it did look like they genuinely tried to follow what needed to be done. Then when Aaron, you and I had spoke, I reached out to Marty, who does a lot of painting in the historical district, multiple buildings, and he has a lot of experience. So he went back down and filled out the whole package, everything for the certificate of appropriateness and everything that needed to be done along with the barricade permit. And he called me up and said, that, that we were good to go. He genuinely thought that we were, because he did get approved for the barricade permit and everything. It was our understanding that wouldn't be approved unless it was okay to proceed and move forward. And so that is how we ended up here. The exterior of the building was in really bad shape beforehand. I know a gentleman who had like 10 buildings right on that lot, and everybody has given us just so many compliments on it. And again, we really want to try and do the right thing. They own multiple properties, and it was just really just generally trying to improve the property. If you look at that versus where it is right now, I don't think there's a question that that whole left-hand side of the building, the brick, we tried to recreate the original feel and structure of the brick, because it was really, really dented and cracked, which you really couldn't do even if you tried to re-put up the building. So that was why they originally wanted to paint it. And again, we want to make the building beautiful, and whatever we can do to, try to make the building beautiful and rectify it is what we're going to do.
I have a few questions. First off, can you tell me, so the area where the worst conditions were is where?
It's on the far left-hand side, just to the left of where that air conditioner is, and I'll look at that window. If you look, if you zoom in on that, you can see like a whole vein going up the side of that. And right into there, and it goes all the way down. So what we did is we tried to reform it up and actually like recreate like if it wasn't the field of brick, and then paint it, because it just structurally it just deteriorated so that.
So I do see that just right where actually the hand is, looks like there's quite a bit of mortar missing. Did you repoint the building as well?
Well, is what we did do. It wasn't a full repointing of it, but what we did, we definitely cleaned it up, and we repointed some of it, and where we couldn't repoint it, we didn't, caulk it as well. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was like it was called like an acrylic filler. So structurally, it helps to bind it.
So Aaron, a couple I'm sorry.
Was the deterioration limited to the mortar joints?
No, it was right down the face of the brick. There was better than a half-inch gap, and it kind of zigzagged all the way up the side, right down the middle of the bricks. It wasn't just on the perimeter of the bricks.
There were cracked brick.
Actual cracked brick, and that is why we did use that acrylic bonding agent to try to keep it intact.
But the surface of the brick itself was intact.
The sides of it were, but obviously there was just white stress cracks that were in there.
What caused those cracks? Is there structural the water intrudes in there?
It actually water didn't get into the interior of the building, but it was definitely at one point, because up at the top right there, at some point there must have been some water actually coming right down through, and just from years and years and years of erosion, it just started to erode it. And you can look like we went ahead and we refaced a lot of the plywood out in the building, and then up at the top, like where there was going to, we tried to put some metal on there and move it.
Before you painted it, were there any thoughts of just cleaning?
So, you know what, we did actually pressure wash it, and we did, you know what I mean, and it just, the brick was just so old and faded, it really didn't do much. And then again, for the areas where there were stress cracks on it, it didn't, we still have those voids there, so we're trying to give it a nice, and again, the colors, if you look at other buildings that use those, the similar color tonalities, and they feel like this product was some of that gold. Yeah, actually,
I wouldn't show them.
yeah, This is Marty, by the way, that's who I deal with. But then that's the brick itself is split right up over here. We use the epoxy filler.
I think, from a preservation perspective, for how you treat storm masonry,
Yeah.
there's probably quite a number of things that you did, which, yeah, there's some structural stuff going on there. Probably quite a number of things that you did, which from a preservation perspective, one would be different.
Okay.
But, Aaron, I have a question
Yes.
for you. Is the building permit that was issued included painting of the brick? Which
I
think is what you
believe,
said.
I believe with the building permit that was issued that Ken spoke to was for the interior renovation of the structure.
So did it, I guess my question is, was there an internal error in processing? Or, I'm trying to figure out what happened. So you, I thought you said that the building permit called for exterior cleaning.
It did, it actually had that in the application, and the original application that my child had filled out was approved from my understanding. And then we went back again, and I had, and Marty went back down again when after Aaron and I spoke, because I get, at that point, it was about like historical preservation, and we didn't certificate of appropriateness. We filled out all the paperwork, and then I want to say, I think like 2 weeks went by, and it was approved, and, you know, and at that point,
What was approved?
well, the barricade permit and building. At that time.
Okay, I'm trying to find out if it was,
Yeah.
the system wasn't working in the
So-
city, or if you proceeded and then once you were notified that it stopped, you all completed.
So no, I didn't. So let me clarify that. That's a great question. So the email thread that I again, I came in after many hands were in the pot. The application was, my child had submitted everything and did like a day and it was approved. And I think that genuinely what happened there was maybe it was the interior that maybe got approved, but there was no clear delineation that the interior work would not be exterior work. And we told me they'd seen him at a different property. And they had a verbal conversation, and it was a green light. And then Aaron actually called me up, and rightly so, I guess they said that please stop working on it. And I immediately stopped working on it. Tried to learn more about the process. I reached out to Marty again because he's done multiple buildings, and he went down and filled out the paperwork and put a very deep permit and the application to do the work, the building permit, and then.
But wasn't there already a building permit?
So, yeah, so,
Okay, Aaron.
so there was a building permit applied for in 2020, and the interior portion of that permit was issued based on the discussion that I had with Dave Lucier. The interior renovations and gutting and all that was issued, but there was no exterior work issued as part of that permit. So
That the exterior work was not
was
mentioned?
not issued, so it was not included when that permit was issued. The permit was only for interior work.
But it was mentioned in there, that's only how I was.
Okay. I can go back and I can look at it. And then the paint work had begun in June, I believe.
Yeah.
And at that point, that was when the discussion was brought up as to whether or not the exterior work had been permitted as part of that 2020 permit, and it had not. So they were still waiting to receive the approvals for the exterior work on the building, which was when Ken and I spoke, and we had discussed the removal of the paint work that had previously been done in June, or applying for the full painting of the building to come before the HRC. What I think may have happened with the paint permit was that you only received the sidewalk barricade. You did not receive the certificate of appropriateness or the building permit to do the painting. That is still being held within our permitting system. It has not been issued.
In 2020, did they file a building permit application that included outdoor exterior painting?
I'll have to go back and I'll have to look at it. I just know that an interior permit was issued at that time.
Right. I guess I'm more interested in what the application said, because if you're a person who's building and you submit an application and it includes exterior and interior, other words, one might not notice that it was only for the interior, and then also if they submitted an application that included interior and exterior work in a historic district in 2020, why didn't we review it in 2020? And I'm just curious, like, you know, if you're in the building permit office and you get an application that includes exterior work, but it isn't a formal HRC application, do they immediately send it to you? Like, there's like a big lag, and you only found out, I thought, because somebody told you that they saw the same thing happening. But meanwhile, the building office, the building department has had this permit application, so.
I know that there was, and I will have to go back, I will have to look at the permit. There was discussion with Mike about, you know, what needed to be applied for, what was required, what a certificate of appropriateness was required for the application process. And I'll have to go back and see if that permit ever did come back. At that point, it may have been a paper permit. I'm not quite sure, but I know that the chain that I have for between Mike, who is the property owner, one of the parties that owns the building, was about the process of applying for a certificate of appropriateness, what was required and what work they were considering to do. I don't necessarily remember reviewing an actual certificate of appropriateness for that work.
One of the things they didn't understand was actually the color statement and the colors that they showed on the original application of the exterior. And I know 2021 was difficult, again, with everybody was all COVID and all that. And so, Mike, and he did say that he did speak, you know, one day, and again, I did only say a verbal thing, and something I left in the relation, I forgot. As a contractor, he mentioned to me, and I put everything was in order, and I absolutely trying to get the file, especially us over there, and I had a conversation, that's why I did send, I had Marty go back down and try to be compliant, but still didn't back out. And when we spoke to the people in the office, they had mentioned, you know, that's why, like, I had asked him like 3 different times, and just, I think it was irrelevant, because I didn't think you could get a barricade permit without building permit. So the barricade permit was definitely issued, and I felt comfortable at that point, and I thought we were okay. So, and whatever, at this point, I don't know, I'm not saying it's a bad go, but it's a much more practical way than it was then, okay? And so,
I'd like to understand really clearly what happened, and if it's a disconnect in our end, meaning the city tenant, then that's one path.
Okay.
If it's not, if we don't own it, then we do.
Yeah.
So I'd like to really understand that, and, you know, things happen, but let's at least get all those facts straight.
Yeah, at least understand what was on the building permit, what was applied for.
I mean, definitely, and if there's anything we can do, you know, like we're also trying to like improve upon, you know, some other things, you know, like things in the door and get some things that would be more.
Great.
Yeah, more in tune with, you know, the period and trying to clean up the building, we definitely want to do, so whatever we can do at this point, obviously, we don't want to do.
Would you remove the thing?
Listen, I don't think I have a
Very busy.
I don't think I have a choice. If you guys say that we have to remove the paint, we're going to do it, but obviously have sandblast. I mean, that's, I think the steps to do that will, you know, hopefully we can find another resolution to not have to do that. But
One of the other ways to remove paint under the sand.
well, I understand. I mean, you know, obviously at that point though, the brick was already fragile to begin with, and introducing chemicals and the like, you know, it would be a shame not to do that. But again, I want to be compliant. I want to do a great job, and you know, whatever you do.
So one additional question, if we go by the building, is the exterior work that you intended, that has been intended to be done, is it all complete?
It is, like,
Okay.
yeah, so everything is done.
We'll be able to look at the moldings and how you match them and how you treat the wood and the rest of the.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really good to go out of the way to try and do a nice job. And the last thing, that again, we want to definitely do something with the storm door, and I think we did that with the storm plastic, but everything else is in order.
Okay, so take a look at that.
Yeah, I think something that gets a little lost by the painting of the building is in the bay, the panels, the spandrel panels, in the sills should be a contrasting color or something to set them apart so that the bay has a uniformity to it. Right now, the white paint going straight through almost wipes them out in their individual.
That's actually, yeah, that's a good idea. It's almost like a blue band almost, like maybe you can see that like blue kind of down the middle of that, like that.
Could you go back to the photo?
Yeah.
Three paint. All treated as one.
I see what you're saying.
Right.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Don't do it yet.
No. Put away.
It's just a discussion.
Yeah, no, I like the idea.
Let the paintbrush away for a little longer.
Absolutely.
It looks like the panels were taken off at one point. And it's almost like a piece of plywood now in the center units. And no, I don't think it looked like that originally.
So that upper left and maybe upper right has all the molding there, right?
Yeah, on the upper one.
And then it's been at the others as well.
Yeah, I would have assumed that they would have all had that.
Yeah, I would think so.
How old is the building? It's a great question. I want to say that. It's quite old, obviously, and I can tell you, that's what I was thinking, I was probably like. But, again, too, we also try to do a lot of corners work and things like, when they look at the, picture of it, just to really try to train everything up.
So Erin, can you send us the correspondence, either the chronology and whether you can send us the actual permit application or not, just making sure we know what was in that 2020 initiative in front of the application?
Mm-hmm.
The brick was not meant to be painted. Historically, no, it's just it's a hard piece of brick. And it's been like that since 1890. So if you come along and paint it, it's not. Wasn't.
Says that you painted it to mask some of the structural damage. I hate to think that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we're trying to hide it in this structural damage, it's more of a question of trying to tighten it up, but I get what you're saying, yeah, what we're trying to do is, it's just in its state, it's not like it's very easy to go out and get it right from that, that age and that, things, but even replace pieces of it would make sense, and it was more of a question of just trying to make it look consistent and fluid and structurally safe as well. I mean, everything it is tight on it right now.
Oh, may I ask you a question? Now the original application was submitted with the interior work in 2020. I submitted the first week of July after they had said, stop. Well, there was no official stop work order as far as I know, but the owner was notified and asked to stop painting. That's when it was halfway up. And then I was contacted. I filled out all the appropriate paperwork, the pictures, the color swatches for the color change. And then my barricade permit was issued on 7/19. No work was performed continuing the painting up until the end of the first week of August. Now, even when I went in to speak to the ladies at Code, they even said, why hasn't there been anything moved forward? There was no answer on the appropriateness or why did it sit for another full month with no, when the barricade permit was issued, I was told that no work could be performed, no barricade permit would not be issued without the building permit and the other approvals. And they were wondering why it sat for another full month with nothing, from historics. If there was a hard, an answer like yellow hard brick cannot be painted, it's pretty clear. You guys should have just said no.
Mhm.
So.
I think that's what's part of what we're trying to find out.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
sequence, got to where it is.
Right,
And I yeah.
do a lot of work in the city of Albany, Hamilton Street, Jay,
Mhm.
Hudson, and I do a lot of nice work, a lot of the nicer work in the areas, and like I said, I don't want to ruin my reputation or, cause any trouble for myself or the building owners especially. So it wasn't our intent to skip your process and just go ahead and do it. I honestly thought that maybe the permits were being mailed to me and the barricade permit was on email.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it was just a misunderstanding on my part.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to represent the owners as well.
Yeah, and the lag time is a little bit on me because I do have such a large number of permits coming through my desk. I'm not quite sure why it did take a month, but I will definitely go back and look at when it did actually get forwarded to my office. So
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Here's a thought for most of you to really hear about the work that you're doing. The part of the interior, National Park Service, has a series of preservation groups.
Okay.
50 of them. And there's one on historic masonry. I think there's one on and
Yes.
take a look at those, because that'll kind of give you a little more background of some of the concerns that we're referencing, because we're doing work in the city, and that's kind of a nice synopsis of some of the technical issues and approaches that are affecting the
That's Department of Interior.
Yeah. I may, yeah.
Preservation groups.
Okay.
And Ken, I think I have those usually, so I can send them on to you.
I appreciate
Yep.
that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions about?
No, I have a question for Erin. In the materials you're compiling from the building department, I would just ask about this barricade permit issue, because I can see how that issuance would lead to a misunderstanding on the part of the owner.
Yes.
Because why do you issue a barricade permit? And you issue barricade permit for exterior work. So.
Yeah, why would you ask for one without a painted?
Right. And why would you issue it when it's still pending? Why would they issue
You get a
it?
barricade permit for a dumpster.
Okay.
But it was specifically applied, right?
Got it. Okay, thank you.
But it was specifically, entered with a painting part, painted, a full painting application. And the specific, on a barricade permit, it asks for a specific use of the barricade permit, which is to have a 35 to 40 foot lift for this particular exterior project. Because I asked them if they could, because there was prep work on the wood, the metal up top, do the scraping ahead of the paintwork, do the preparation. And they said that they cannot issue the barricade permit without the other approvals. Very specifically said to me in the office because I asked if I could get ahead so I could get the prep work done ahead of the painting.
But they did.
And they said no, and yes, and that's what led to me to believe that I could go ahead and just finish the
They
painting.
told you that they couldn't issue it until they had the historic preservation approval, but then they did issue it.
Correct.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So when you made application, when you made application, was capital in the lower cap or anything?
Yes.
Okay.
And that warrant was painted because we thought we were okay for back in the previous law.
From 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, all. I really
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We'll be working with you further.
Absolutely. Please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay.
Okay, the next public workshop agenda item is a very familiar one to all of this one. 25 Delaware Avenue.
So Dan Hirschberg is here tonight, and we also have Michael Berkby and Matt Dugan on. Michael is from Conifer, and Matt is the architect representing the project. So 25 Delaware Avenue, this came through last year for 2 concept reviews in front of the Historic Resource Commission for the construction of a 5-story addition to the 2.5-story fire signal building. It's 4 stories of residential units and a subsurface 1 story of subsurface parking under the building. Dan, are you presenting or should I have Matt present?
No, I can start.
Okay.
A number of
Can you remind us where we left off?
So the commission had left off on June 7th. It came for the second concept review on June 17th, 2020. Let me back up, sorry. It had come before the commission in May 2020. At that meeting, the commission had recommended modifications to some of the material treatments, the cladding. There was also some exterior like wrapping system to provide detailing to the different stories. And also the commission wanted to conduct a site visit. At the time, because of COVID, we couldn't do a full site visit together. So Commissioner Pinckney and Commissioner Kaplan, you both went out to the site and provided comments, mostly on the treatment of the fire signal building, the basement windows and how those infills would be treated. And then there are also some further recommendations which are in the presentation tonight that addressed treatment for the exterior cladding on the addition to the fire signal building, the brick cladding, as well as the stucco treatment and the addressing the color treatment for the stucco. The finish to the cementitious siding. So I believe that they're going to go through that tonight. But I think otherwise at the June 16th meeting, the feedback was fairly, I think was in support of the project moving forward based on the comments. It was just how they were addressing the exterior treatment to the structure.
So we had spoken of a height, a story, right?
I believe so. I mean, it appears to be.
And the other piece I remember is the footprint on the site.
A number of things were changed as a result of 2 things. There was a Historic Resource Commission summer visit in 2020.
Yep.
And then there was the June 17th, 2020 meeting. And there were significant revisions made as a result of both of them.
To the building and its footprint.
Yeah, the building footprint changed as well as
Right.
the details regarding brick color and lentils and things like that. I'll let Matt go to those.
Okay.
I think initially, I just like to start to tell you that the site plan has changed somewhat. If you go to the, that's existing conditions, it doesn't interest anybody other than the fire signal building shown there. That's the full site plan, it's changed, the shape of the patio has changed, and we made an attempt to save 2 more trees at the request of the city forester. And if you go to the next sheet, which is the landscape plan, it shows the trees we can save, and it gives you an idea of the plan that we are We actually got our site plan approval from the planning board, conditional upon HRC's approval. So they were satisfied with the change we made to the site, and all the departments were satisfied. We had a whole bunch of other issues, stormwater management issues, as you might imagine, with a site like this, which is in a fine sewer overflow area. We ended up putting a significant storage structure beneath the garage. We had a, again, we went through a whole bunch of issues there. But the issues that you folks are concerned with, if you go to slide number 6, I think your numbers are different.
My numbers are different.
These are different. I'm going to go right on back to the one after the landscape plan. I'm going to let Matt Dugan take over at this point. Matt, you want to start them through the review of?
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you all. It's good to see you at least virtually again. So one of the things I want to note as we go through this presentation is that we did include all of the comments from the May 2020 meeting and also from the June 2020 site visits. So as we go through the presentation, where we have the appropriate image, or in some cases, there really isn't the need for an image, we have put in the comments and the design team response to those comments. So here is the Delaware Avenue elevation of the fire signal building. And as we go, if you can go to the next slide, please. Here is the rear elevation of the fire signal building. So at one point, the two buildings were proposed to be connected with a canopy. That is no longer part of the project. And this rear elevation, you can see where we have the gray highlighted areas. Those areas are currently large openings. So the backside of this building has significant masonry infill work proposed. And there are no existing windows on this elevation. And I'll speak more about that as we go through some of the commission's comments from last year. Next slide, please. So these are now the west and east elevations of the building. The east elevation is the side that is presented as you enter into the site as a pedestrian. And you'll see that as we go further into the presentation. Next slide, please. So we've included the floor plans here to help orient how the building works and what is located on each floor. So the image on the right is ground floor. This ground floor, although is only accessible from the quote unquote rear side, so essentially the side facing the new proposed building. And you can see that on two of the four sides of this building is largely below grade. And we'll see that further when we go to some of the images regarding the infilled openings. And then the image on the left is the upper level. And this is the main floor of the building, if you will. It has an entrance with those existing stoops, which you'll see right in the center of the plan there. So from a functionality standpoint, originally the building was mainly entered from that second level, but what's proposed is for accessibility reasons that the primary entrance will be at this lower level, which is at grade. Next slide, please. So here are the first group of the site visit question or comments. So the first comment was, where existing brick units are severely spalded, new molded brick units are to match the original in all visual and physical characteristics, provide sample for review and approval. So what we would like to do is provide samples and do a mock-up of this right on the building so that we can show the compatibility. The next question is along the same lines. New mortars to match original sound mortar and visual physical characteristics. Provide mock-up for review and approval. So our thought is we would do a mock-up for the mortar and also have the brick in that same mock-up. And then the third one would be to not clean the brick, or to not clean the brick, but to just clean the decorative stone features along the gable copings. So our response is we would like to do a mock-up of cleaning both the brick and the stone for approval. Next slide, please.
Question on number 1 there. Match the original, and your design response is that the samples will be provided. Is the intent that those samples will all match the existing?
Yes. Yes, that is.
Did that go?
So item number 4 is new precast lintels and sills on the west wall. So that's that elevation we can see below. This is the side facing the new proposed building. Should be simple and not replicate the existing, not unless existing evidence suggests otherwise. So we do not have evidence of what those existing lintels were. So you can see this is the current proposal for this elevation, and you can see we have simplified the design. On the other 3 elevations, the lintels are not just a horizontal piece; they're actually a 3-piece lintel. So there's a lintel that functions as a head that goes over the window, and then it extends about 3 brick down on the jambs. So our proposal is to not include that here. The other feature on the other 3 elevations is there's a decorative scroll on those lintels. So our proposal is to not include those. And we're provided a window head and sill detail to the right to illustrate what our proposal is. Next slide, please. Number 5, provide a mock-up demonstrating no damage to concrete wall, following removal of black paint, gentlest method possible. So we will be using the gentlest method possible. It may be a bit of, a mock-up is going to be very important. And so that is what our proposal is, to do a mock-up. Start very carefully. I should say, start with very low pressure and see if that's enough, and then continue to very carefully remove it with more pressure as necessary. But again, a mock-up will be done for this paint removal process. 6, retain and repair existing historic copper roofing and flashing. There was no mention of replacement material. Copper, patina, or aluminum with baked nail and finish matching the green patina. The existing copper material appears salvageable. So our proposal is to repair or replace the existing copper roofing with new copper roofing as required. If there is salvageable portions, that is something that will happen. However, from what we're seeing, it looks like it's probably more on the replace side, but we're certainly not going to replace a copper roof that's in good shape. And again, the proposal is to replace it in kind with standing seam copper roofing where required. Reuse existing copper gutters and downspouts, new to match the existing in appearance, color, and in-wall attachment. So the design response is it is proposed to repair or replace the existing copper gutters and downspouts with new as required. Where there are no gutters or downspouts today, the new copper gutters and downspouts are to be provided. So essentially, I think there's one existing downspout on the building, and the gutters exist on the Delaware Avenue side, but they do not exist on the side facing the new proposed building. Number 8, reuse and repair existing copper window frames and mullions. They appear salvageable. Reuse existing copper door frames and transom frames if extant. And the design response is the existing windows are steel and are fixed shut due to age and the state of disrepair. And it is proposed to install new aluminum clad windows to allow for window operation. Next slide, please. Patch repair front concrete steps where corners of treads are broken and missing. New concrete to match original concrete in all visual and physical characteristics. Remove all remnants of middle railing and patch resulting holes. So this is included in the project scope. Remove all vine vegetation from the south wall. That is included in the project scope. Prune back existing tree limbs far enough to prevent future tree contact with roof and masonry walls. Total tree removal is an option. This will be included in the project scope, and the approved site plan with the planning board salvages many trees, but also does include the removal of some trees as well, especially the ones closest to the building. Properly caulk all joints between masonry and frames of openings. This is included in the project scope. And the Moore Street elevation is still the lower level window should be recreated to match existing. And the design response is the lower window sills will be retained, repaired, or recreated as needed. I think when we go to the next slide, there'll be an image of that as well. Next slide, please. So here you can see the existing window sills. So these will be retained. So this was, we'll now talk about item number 14. So on the Delaware Avenue elevation, which this photo illustrates, the lower level window openings appear to have ability to be infilled with new windows rather than the recessed masonry proposed, and still be adequately above grade. Even if the height of the south window openings need to be slightly reduced, this treatment will greatly enhance what is the most important elevation. A solid panel or alternate obscure glazing material could be used at those openings where natural light is not desired. So you can see from this photo that the majority of these windows are basically have the windowsill at grade, and the one with the highest reveal is less than or perhaps a foot at its highest from grade. So we would like to propose to go with a solid panel for weather issues, particularly snow drifts, and also the space behind this are utility spaces and restrooms. So essentially we're looking to set back the new masonry infill, which is actually the base of this building is currently has a stucco parge. The idea is to have that stucco parge recessed an inch at these locations. Next slide, please. And so now this is a question from the meeting. So we now move beyond the site visit questions. This question is very similar to the site visit one. It says basic window niches should be set back to match the setback of the first floor windows, or use a different colored parge on the niches than the basement parge finish. So the infill is shown at 1 inch back from the face, and the material is proposed to be the concrete parge. And the idea is to continue the pattern that is present in the base. We felt that having a smooth finish in these openings looked less polished and less in keeping with the architecture of the building. So the proposal is to continue that block score line pattern in these openings, but the proposal is to set it back an inch to match the window setbacks in order to differentiate that these are infilled openings. And then the second comment was look at lines, which is essentially what we were talking about with those score lines, and setting it back 1 inch. Next slide, please. And again, there was a comment about that sills should be installed to evoke the feeling of windows, and those sills do exist, so those sills will be retained. Next slide, please. So another comment was to revise proposed stucco color on the northeast entrance to a darker color to help reduce the visual impact. So the color that we're proposing is intended to match the color of the brick in the fire signal building. The idea is we're trying to tie together the masonry elements of this entrance to be both evocative of the fire signal building, but also take some of the more mid-century modern language from the former school, current Boys and Girls Club across the street. But again, the color is intended to match the color of the brick of the fire signal building. Next slide, please. So another one of the comments was to explore the use of the random recess pattern with linear brick to provide visual relief. So since last year, we have looked at the masonry at the building, at the proposed new building, I should say, and we haven't taken this comment literally, but I think we have taken the intent, and so we took the intent of this comment essentially to add some more detail to the masonry. And so what we are proposing to do is to put a soldier course along the top of the masonry and above the windows, and also to do a soldier course at the bottom of the windows, which you'll see on one of the later images here. We essentially have near floor to ceiling large openings. On the other portions of the building where it's more punched openings at the units, that is where we had that soldier course below. Next slide, please. So again, this image, you can actually see that soldier course perhaps a bit better as we zoom in. So we're trying to bring in some of the banding that exists in the fire signal building, and essentially a nod to that. And also bring in some of that masonry detail work that you can find in the fire signal building. Here, the comment that we're talking about is to explore options to use architectural masonry block to reference the two-story masonry building instead of linear brick. So we looked at that, and again, we have changed the brick from what we had presented a year ago. The brick is now a Norman brick, so that's just under 12 inches long. What we had shown last year was a 24-inch long brick. So this brick is a bit different than the brick at the fire signal building, but we wanted to have a brick that had a more linear nature, because this element of the building we're really conceiving of as something that does have that mid-century modern influence, as well as tying into signal building. So we're really trying to have this element be a bridge between the two buildings at this corner. Another neat thing that we thought this design has that is evocative and brings in inspiration from the fire signal building is that the fire signal building uses a brick upper level, and it has a stucco parge with score lines on the lower level. So here we've essentially flipped that, and we have the stucco finish with the score lines on the upper two levels, and we have the smaller textured brick on the lower levels. And then the final thing that really has kept us with a brick as opposed to a large masonry block is just the nature of the fenestration ratio to opening ratio. And we felt that while the masonry block work, or the faux masonry block, I should say, it's on the base of the fire station building, works great, where the percentage of opening to masonry is much more on the side of masonry. Here, where it's reversed, we thought having the smaller scale of the brick worked better from a scale perspective than having larger block in this particular application. Next slide, please. The exposed concrete rear west wall should feature detailing or recesses that allow the 4-bay pattern of the residential building to reduce the visual impact. So the image below is what we had presented last year, and the image above is what we are proposing to do today. So what we're looking to do is essentially drop the amount of exposed concrete to be, significant reduction. So essentially, we've taken the cladding of the upper levels of the building and we've dropped it 5 feet lower. So that lines up with where the maroon section of the building towards the left is, which has a door out of the stair. So that essentially creates a nice datum line that wraps around the building. It also works out well where when we do wrap to the garage elevation, it wraps right above the garage doors. So that paired with the proposed plantings along this elevation make the amount of exposed concrete greatly reduced. And we're actually quite happy with this from a design direction. It really makes the building feel more grounded, and it helps bring the scale, really reinforces the scale at 4 stories as opposed to buildings sitting on top of a garage. And another thing it does that we think works out well is it reinforces those bays, which you can see in the maroon color. And next. Composite siding should feature a smooth finish. So the design intent is to use the clapboard siding in a contemporary way to create a material transition from the predominantly masonry buildings along Delaware Avenue. So that's the Hackett Middle School, the Boys and Girls Club, and the Fire Signal Building. And then to transition that down to the predominantly wood frame clapboard buildings west of Lark Street. So using a wood grain, we feel, is more in keeping with the buildings to the west of Lark Street. And so our proposal is to maintain, but again, we're using this in a contemporary way, and we're not trying to make this clapboard be evocative of of a metal panel or masonry. We're trying to really lean into the idea that these are clapboards. And next slide, please. So this is the revised design from the corner of Delaware Avenue and Myrtle Avenue. You can see the garage in the lower left corner. You can see here that the clapboard siding has been dropped to 5 feet lower. It lines up just with the top of those garage doors. Next slide, please. So here is the Delaware Avenue elevation. You can see how the building really or the site really slopes here. Next slide, please. Here's now the elevation in the courtyard. So that same elevation, but now we've worked our way slightly down the hill. And now we are in between the two buildings. You can see where we have the stucco, the board and batten siding that we have in the maroon, which is on the upper level. And we'll see that again when we go to the next image. The next slide, please. So that board and batten that we're looking at on the upper level of the building, that volume slides down and creates a hyphen between the blue clapboard siding element on the right and the stucco and masonry entry element on the left. And again, you can see below the blue clapboard element, we continue that Norman brick with the soldier course along the top and soldier courses below the windows. Next slide, please. Now we've got an enlargement of the Lark Street elevation. Again, you can see we're using the board and batten at that hyphen where the stair door is. Again, you can see the clapboard element at the corner on the left side with the masonry below. And then you can see again that we've lowered the clapboard down 5 feet from where it was last year. Next slide, please. And then here we are on the Myrtle Avenue elevation. This is the lowest point of the site. So this is where you slip into that subterranean garage. Again, you can see that the clapboards is brought down right to the head of the garage door. Next slide, please. So here is the garage level. On the left is Myrtle Avenue. That's where the garage entrance is. And then on the bottom of the page and on the right, the garage is nearly completely buried. And then it begins to become slightly more and more exposed along Lark Street. And this is where those clapboards actually extend 5 feet down this garage face. Next slide, please. This is the first floor of the building. On the right is where the entry is. There is a management office and leasing office. That's where we had the larger openings at the entrance area. So the program works well with what the facade is doing in that section. The rest of this floor is residential units. Next slide, please. Levels 2 and 3 are essentially identical to each other. They're units along with other functions that support the units, such as laundry rooms, trash rooms, and janitor's closets. And then next slide, please. The 4th floor does have a slight variance from the lower floors, where in the lower right corner, you can see that the building sets back. So above that entry stucco element, the 4th floor is actually set back. So that is where we have that maroon colored board and batten mass that comes around and then creates that hyphen between the 2 corner elements on the right side of this plan. I believe this is the last slide here. Do you mind just seeing if it is? Oh no, there's one more. The roof plan we've included here to show that above the 4th level, there's a stair to provide access to the mechanical units, and there are mechanical units, but there is not a penthouse here. It's just simply an elevator overrun, a stair, a screening that you can see here, and then mechanical units serving the building. And actually, Anne, if you go back one slide, there's one more thing I do want to point out.
Yep.
That's the last slide.
I know. He asked me to go back one.
You can see on the top of this plan that those bays that we were referring to along Lark Street are actually recesses that have protruding elements that create bins. So it's kind of a reverse bay. So those recesses that you're seeing is where that more maroon-ish color with the board and batten is located. That's all we have. So hopefully you feel you've answered your questions, and we're here to answer any more questions you may have.
I'll speak first. I'm actually pretty troubled by the project. I think the footprint is better, but I think this is one of our visually prominent buildings, and the level of restoration that you're doing is not, in my opinion, good enough. I think that you went through a lot of our concerns and it sounded like dismissed them. I would like to see much more effort on the existing building restoration, not just the copper roof. I'm glad you're keeping that. The treatment of the windows, the treatment of the lower level, those things are of concern to me. It's a very important building here, and it feels like it's being paid half attention to. The other concern that I have is I actually think the best elevation was the Myrtle Street elevation because the building is simplest. Can you go back to the elevation drawings, Erin? I think this building should be a backdrop that highlights our historic building. And now if you can go back to probably I want to call this elevation not south. So if you can keep going, I'll tell you which one I want. It's probably what we see from Delaware Ave.
Okay.
Next one.
What happened to
Yeah.
all the windows?
So it's busy, it detracts. There's 5 different materials on some of those elevations. So I think that perhaps the elevation that faces away from our building, a single elevation, maybe some of these color changes and material changes make sense. But one more time, please, Erin, back to Delaware Avenue.
Nope, sorry.
Well, that's another one that's very busy. And this does not highlight our building. So from the treatment of grade and the windows at the lower level, I don't really understand what's being done with the primary windows. You said they were steel. I don't know that they're steel now, but then you want to put new aluminum windows in, not a restoration treatment. And this it's so dwarfed by this building, and it becomes even more so by your use of various colors, various materials. I don't think that that color reference that you made on the right side to our building, I don't think that's supportive as well as highlighting our building. So I'm not very supportive of what I see.
On that picture there, I thought we had enclosed windows. It's just an indentation on the basement level.
So, Aaron, do you mind going to the elevations of the
Yep.
fire signal building? This is more of a rendering. It's not the fire signal building here. It was more of a graphic representation. Here we go.
Yeah, but it looked like they were all smoothed over in the illustration, and they're supposed to they're supposed to show up. Even if it's a 1 inch.
That's correct.
Something should be there, and the symmetry from the main floor down should be, they should be together. In the drawing, you get 2 horizontal lines that are all one color.
I'm going to argue that they should be treated as windows. I know you've got restaurants and utilities down there, but you've got some grade that you can work with. You can easily get 8 inches from the base of those windows and the 2 outside edges. Easily, you could put whatever kind of glazing you want and or something solid behind it. But
Were they windows?
yeah.
They should be windows.
Yeah.
Aaron, do you mind going to the photo? I think a picture tells it's worth 1,000 words.
It's just the primary elevation of a very, very important building to us. And it doesn't feel that even your casual rendering indicates that your focus is on the new construction and not on this building. And I'd like to see a higher level of restoration of those elements for this building. I also don't understand the west elevation. I didn't have enough information to see what's existing next to what we did show.
The west elevation.
So I have questions about that. We don't have the answers right now, but what are those changes to the west elevation, to the, what you call the west elevation, which is the rear?
I do like the improvement on the west elevation though, in that it has really shrunk a lot of the poured concrete that made the whole project look like a parking garage
Of the new construction.
with poured concrete with some
Yeah, I agree.
residential.
That was good.
I think there's a lot of solutions that are taking on actually both the south and the west side on that basement level. Really minimize the concrete look.
I agree, but I don't think, can you go to the Morris Ave site, the north elevation?
Yep.
With the new construction on it, the one that has the Norman brick on it.
The rendering?
The rendering.
Or,
It's the,
or,
no, not in the disposition plan, in his.
yep, hold on.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, putting Norman brick there just makes no sense. Putting it just, I just love, like, I'm reinforcing the point of Commissioner Kaplan's point that it's just very busy, and this Morris Street, it's a very visible intersection, and if you could simplify it, and please don't put Norman brick there. That's my opinion. I don't know if the other commissioners agree, but you know, it should. It seems like it's better to be true to what the building's trying to be than put in some material that doesn't belong on kind of ground floor foundation type elevation. It never would have been there in the first place.
When you say don't use Norman, do you mean use like a modular brick?
No, I'm saying, use whatever, just don't. I mean, frankly, I would rather see, I don't even know what I would rather see, but not Norman brick. I just use one material there, and it's hard to give good feedback when that's so busy, because I don't even really know what to suggest. I mean, what I would really suggest is pull the plywood siding down to the level of the windows, and then put like a belt course or something to delineate, you know, the end of the building. I mean, I keep thinking about the project that we just looked at on North Pearl. And that's where, you know, visually, I keep coming back to a project like that. That's just, it's more simple.
My concern is, we got 5 different materials.
Yeah.
And I misspoke. I called another elevation Morris Street. Erin, could you find the flip side of this? I guess.
Myrtle, it's Myrtle, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Myrtle. So there's a simplified elevation. It may have some other things we want to discuss, but it's backdrop.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in more deference to our building, which I think is suggested here, perhaps not perfect, but doesn't have 5 different materials, it doesn't have 4 or 5 different colors, and all that other busyness going on.
Can you go to the Lark Street? I think it's the red and yellow, or red and blue, yeah. I mean, that could also be simplified, but at least you don't have, it looks like that's at least you have 2, well, except for whatever's going on the end there, but let's ignore that more side, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I agree. I think the more
Going back to the largest exposure there on the west end on Lark Street. I don't have a lot of problems with it. I think there's been a lot of improvements, but I'm a little bit nervous where it says board and batten on the red that goes from the floor to the ceiling type of thing. I hope it doesn't look like corrugated metal on park roofs that's painted red or on barn roofs. You know, it's, like to know what it really looks like. To me, board and batten is not all the same boards. You know, you have a blank spot, and then there's another, and then a blank spot, and then another thin board that breaks it up. When I look at this, it looks like corrugated metal that you put on top of a shed and then painted it red. And I hope that the real thing looks a little more elegant than that. It has a real utilitarian look to it that I can't really look at the material, but somehow it's bringing attention to me that I have a different image.
Is this just a workshop this evening?
Yes. So no action, no action by the board tonight.
I think the other thing is what was mentioned. The most important thing is to make sure that the historic building remains the importance and the focal point of everything. Whether the rest of it is compatible or even a backdrop,
Backdrop.
backing for it, showing for it. Usually, the first memory you get when you look at it is got to be a favorable one on what a magnificent building is that Marcus Reynolds building.
Just to summarize, we're talking about trying to tone things down with look toward a higher degree of simplification. Maybe not as much color contrast and focus on texture of the various materials and some of them, how they are juxtaposed. I think the Lark Street elevation works quite well with the reduction in the barrier look of the concrete wall. And certainly I applaud everything that we can do for the fire signal wall, because that is the jewel on the property and deserves a lot of attention. I would be interested in seeing physical samples at some point of the materials. You know, what does the board and batten siding look like? What does the clapboard siding look like? When we mentioned, I think, use the smooth surface of clapboard siding, we were thinking more in terms of what a painted clapboard sided building would look like, which would be a smooth finish and not an impressed wood grain, because I think that would certainly not be an appropriate look. I guess I'm not as troubled by the Norman brick as some people put it to.
If it was all Norman brick, that's a possibility for discussion, but there's a lot going on.
There are a lot of different materials.
Certainly a whole lot more attention brought to the restoration of the single building, allowing that building in the back to be a lot more subtle, a lot more simple. I don't want to say clean, but uniformly simple. And it would
I'm somewhat disappointed since I thought we had done a better job in coming closer to what we wanted. I'll certainly take it under advisement and see what we can do. I'll see about getting samples from the materials so we can see what they look like.
Well, I think we're much closer relative to, we're not talking about the footprint and the connection to the building. I think it's really two categories. One are the finishes of the new building, and that's an architectural exercise. And the other is a greater focus on the restoration, in particular in the lower levels, and what about the windows of the fire signal building. So those are, seem to me to be readily resolvable, those items.
Just to get a little bit, I'm sorry.
It's not just a finish, it's not about the number of stories, as we've talked about before, it's not about the footprint on the site, or kind of site planning. With a big picture, I think we've made a lot of progress.
I think also the colors, the variety of colors, there's a reason for that, and it's one that we wanted to see. It was to not have an enormous building behind the building you're trying to show off. And by breaking it up with both texture and design and color, makes it less massive, and that's an important thing. I don't have that much trouble with any of the colors.
So if I may ask a question, there has been some very good, great, clear feedback, which I appreciate. The one area that I'm struggling to quite understand the concerns with is this elevation in particular. So there was a comment made that the building has too many materials and is too busy on this elevation. Is the thought that the entry element on the right is perhaps itself too busy, or is it the fact that the fourth floor is a different material than the lower floor? I'm just trying to get something a little bit more direct so that I can better understand what the concerns are, and then to alleviate those concerns and come up with a building that everyone's happy with.
I think the feedback, I think you named it because there was a suggestion that where you have the yellow block to make that darker, to kind of blend more into the background, and that wasn't done. And I think that probably that remains my feedback, is that there's a pretty strong color contrast there, and it pulls your eye to that corner instead of to the building. I agree with Commissioner McEnany that I think otherwise it will have a positive direction here, but you don't necessarily have to use such contrasting colors indefinitely, something darker, and you can use shades of the same color, for example.
I would request that when our next presentation, we take under advisement what you think is appropriate with this conversation, that we see samples. And I think also if you could show us each elevation of the fire signal building, a photograph of the existing right next to the proposed work, that would be very, very helpful. So we can really understand by elevation what's going on.
Aaron, do you mind just going to one of those elevations just so I can get the direct idea? In the beginning of the presentation with the fire signal building elevations.
I think the comment pages were made over existing photographs. The question is, you want to see the existing photograph one and then
yes. Do we want to have this image on the left with the photo?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that.
Okay. And we could even do like a existing condition drawing next to it or something to that effect.
I think
Just the
if
photo.
we have a good photo and you're proposed that would be sufficient. I don't know.
Yeah.
wouldn't go to the extra effort of doing an existing condition just for that illustration, that the photo works really well. The leaves will be off the trees soon, so it'd be easier to photograph.
I just want to say I also appreciate the work that you did on the site plan, because
Site plan, yeah.
as Commissioner Kaufman said, you know, we're not, the site plan, I don't personally have an issue with, and there are things that strides forward on that, so thank you.
Thank you. Again, I guess we got our comments and we got some marching orders. We'll see what we can do next time around.
Great. Thank you all for your feedback and your time.
Well, thank you. I think it's come a long way. It's very close.
Right, let me just double check.
We don't owe anybody a motion on this.
No, if there's no motion, this will come back. Typically this would come back at the next meeting for a hearing, and then the commission would take action at that meeting.
I think we'd like to hold a time on your next agenda. Be certain whether or not we can make all the changes and get the samples together by then. But I would like to hold this based on your next agenda.
Okay, we can do that. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any people signed up to make comments? Okay.
Not this evening. Yes.
So the bill hasn't passed yet, but the state legislature has put forward a bill, it's a governor's program bill, that would, it relates to the eviction moratorium, but there's a part of the bill that relates to the New York State open meetings law. And they're trying to change open meetings law to allow for telephone, like still have an in-person component. You also have the option of meeting fully virtually, having the meeting be conducted by telephone conference, and also saying that the public does not have to be able to attend in person, they can attend 100% virtually. So that's, I'll keep Erin updated. Right now it's only passed the Senate and it's pending, still has to be voted on by the Assembly. But it'll be effective immediately once signed, and it'll be repealed.
Thank you. Well, we good. That's good to know. I think having people being able to attend virtually has been very helpful.
Yeah, the biggest changes are just the telephone piece, but then also currently if any members of public boards, if they are participating virtually, technically the public can attend anywhere that a board member is attending, even if it's not a public location. So for instance, the common council, there was one meeting where Councilmember Carroll was attending from her home, so her home address was on the public meeting notice. So a member of the public could have attended the meeting from her home. Theoretically, I don't think that, I have not heard of any cases of that actually happening.
As you pointed out, when we went to this
Right.
protocol,
Yeah, that
you had, if you can't attend the meeting in person, you have to let us know where you're going to be, and that has to be noticed.
right. So that's why I think initially when we had our first meeting, it wasn't an issue with the first one. I knew you were all going to be here, but why I asked for like that 15-day notice from you all so that I can go out on the legal notice that if you're, and I believe it can be if you're attending anywhere within the, like pretty much anywhere, like we just have to post that address as part of, as a meeting location for the public.
And it doesn't have to be in Albany.
No.
There's a chance I might be several counties away.
Right.
But we can come to you.
But you have to drive up. In January.
In order for that to be noticed, don't we need that information 2 weeks?
That's what she said.
Yep, 15 days. So, yep, I know. So,
Yeah,
Do you want to talk
just
about,
very briefly, yeah.
very briefly, the investigation we did?
The investigation.
The house.
Yeah.
Where the demolition had occurred, and
Yeah. So
the
89,
resultant condition of the building.
89 Clinton Street in South End, kind of a circuitous story how I got involved. I've been doing a survey down there, volunteer survey, and met the owner. And then Kara's been involved with her, and the story begins with the adjacent building, 87 $80. And 89 Clinton, that wall has been left in a very precarious situation. And so, a lot of the things I've been thinking of, as I've kind of organized my thoughts, really go back to the emergency demolition and writing the work that we all did and we wrote and submitted to the county council. So when I go through all this, and I think if, John, it's okay, let's send a copy out to everyone and then maybe we can speak to it at our next workshop. Because what I found was 3 kind of categories. One was that the repairs that were done to the building to remain were very poor. And that woman has been adversely impacted by having no insulation, having interior brick, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of problems that wall was left. And that's an emergency demolition or a demolition issue. What I also discovered in the process, and I couldn't get it 100% clear, and Aaron, you'll help me with this, but from the time that building was first, a violation notice was given, which was 2017.
2017, correct?
It's a really long time. And then it ended with an emergency demolition. So the internal city processes to follow up on those violations does not appear to be aggressive enough. And if you think about it, that is the most critical time period within a building's life. Somebody said, there's a problem. And if what we know is if it's not addressed within a short period of time, we will lose that adjacent building. So, I'm sorry, I just flipped over to the building that was lost. So what you see in that process, studying the time, is that you just kind of dawdle along. Of course, it's going to be an emergency demolition. So there's a problem within the processes within the city. And then the third problem that I came up with going through the materials was same story with the demolition. Where's the engineer's report? The violations talk about front steps and like debris on the site. And then the next thing we know, the building's gone. So same thing, they've got demolition going on, there's no engineer's report. Now, this was not required for us to review it prior to, but we don't understand the processes that the city used for demolition. So in summary, under those 3 categories, we need to talk to the building department. We have to see, we've already made recommendations in our vacant buildings or our emergency action report. Most of them are applicable here, and it's really better coordination with the city to the emergency demolitions and to these processes. And I guess we saw tonight on one of our projects that the internal processes aren't working so well. So this is about demolition. This is about, again, my query started with how this wall on this poor woman's building was left, but it kind of came to some of the items that we were talking about.
Opened up some of the bigger issues that we've been looking at.
Yeah.
The fact that, if the building gets noticed for years, is, with what appear to be minor infractions or something that could be dealt with rather expeditiously, and then all of a sudden it's an emergency.
Can you share that?
Yeah.
We can, yeah, if,
Okay.
I can send it out.
Send it to Aaron and then she'll distribute.
You have it.
Yep.
You have it.
It's, that,
Didn't change.
it didn't change at all. Okay. And I'll
And then
circulate
let's
it.
talk about it at the next workshop and see kind of a process moving forward.
Okay. Anyone else have a?
Are we on the air?
We are,
We are.
yes.
Do we have any other matters to come before the commission this evening?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, if that is the case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Now you can